Hey guys, it's Hiddenpurple, back again for even more in-depth game review. Once again, I've put off playing We Happy Few. Sorry. I've been really absorbed in the grind for the new Destiny expansion, and so I've decided Destiny is what I'm going to talk about this week. Not just Destiny 2, not just Forsaken, but Destiny as a whole, from beginning to end. I'm not sure when I'll get around to playing We Happy Few, so new rule, I'll get to it when I get to it. No more promising when I'll get to a particular video. Sound good? Good. Now, let's dive into my discussion about Destiny. There's a lot to say, so buckle in. First off, I'd like to say that while I enjoy Destiny and I have sunk a lot of time into this game, I do still disagree with how Bungie has handled this game. I want to make it perfectly clear that the fact that I enjoy Destiny does not mean that I agree with Bungie's business practice. I've got a lot to say about the behavior of Bungie and their treatment of the consumers over the past 5 years, on top of reviewing Destiny as a whole. My review of these games will not affect my opinion of the company, and the same applies in reverse. So let's start with my roast of Bungie. For those of you who've spent nearly the last 2 decades under a rock, Bungie is the video game developer behind the critically acclaimed Halo series. They spent the first part of their career under the thumb of Microsoft creating this series and perfecting the first-person shooter. Problem was, Bungie was done with the Halo series after they finished Reach, but Microsoft was not. Bungie had bigger plans for a new IP that they felt would revolutionize the shooter genre. So, they left Microsoft and passed the proverbial Halo torch onto 343. Bungie did make a handful of Halo games after the break with Microsoft, but it's in 2010 when our story truly begins. Bungie had begun development of their brand new intellectual property in earnest. The beginning of this process was marked when Bungie signed a contract with Activision. This was a development agreement promising that Bungie would continue to create the franchise under the Activision banner for 10 years following the initial release of the first game. Fast forward to the launch in September of 2014, the consumers finally get their hands on the year's most anticipated title, and it practically tanks. People play through the pathetic campaign in just a day and find that there's almost no story. Many of the characters that we saw in the promotional material have been changed, and your Guardian has no development as a character, and much of the content we were promised in the aforementioned promotional material is missing. The fans feel betrayed. The company that they've trusted for so many years to produce high-quality entertainment has failed them. They look to Bungie for an answer, but Bungie doesn't really have much to say. So it's up to the fans to try and piece together what the hell happened. It turns out that throughout the development cycle of Destiny, Bungie had lost a lot of senior staff members. So between that and the creative disputes between some of the members of the team, about 8 months before the actual launch, they pretty much tore the whole game down and started over using only a handful of assets from the original iteration. What we were left with was the butchered carcass of the game that we had waited 4 years to get. But we, the fans, could see what it was meant to be, and hope hadn't died yet. The devs at Bungie see this outcry and start to take action. Finally, after a pair of pretty weak expansions, they come out with the Taken King a year later. Destiny is finally starting to feel like the game we were all promised. It's not quite there yet, but this is a step in the right direction. The campaign has a cohesive story from beginning to end. We have new weapons, new subclasses, and best of all, a new raid. This new raid is absolutely massive, and the challenge puts even the best fire teams to the test. Over the next year, Bungie releases a handful of small events to try and tide the player base over until they release Rise of Iron. This DLC added tons of content for the players to grind. Another explorable area expanding the Cosmodrome on Earth, the raid was excellently crafted and tons of fun to play with your fire team. The story, though, takes a step in the wrong direction. Bungie tried to do far too much and spread too thin. They tried to tackle a lot of different concepts, characters, and stories over just a handful of missions. It sucked to see Destiny take a step in the wrong direction in the story department, but the game was beginning to feel whole, truly whole. If you'd been playing since day one, you'd have seen exactly how much the game had changed over the last 2 years. The difference was night and day. With everything in place, we had hope for Destiny 2. Throughout the year leading up to Destiny 2, we were given the moments of triumph, events where Bungie revamps all of the previous raids and brings all of the gear from those raids back to relevancy, allowing us to challenge ourselves all over again with the beloved Year 1 raids. It truly felt like Bungie had finally learned from its mistakes, that Destiny 2 could launch as the game that Destiny had always been meant to, that this series could finally achieve the greatness it deserves, and that we as consumers could be given the game that we had been waiting 4 years for. Launch day for Destiny 2. I played on day 1, and I was devastated to be presented with an absolutely horrendous story. The characters were boring. The plot was trite. The whole Destiny package had been gutted, and it almost felt like launch day of Destiny 1 all over again. Bungie had ripped out so many features from Destiny 1 that we had already paid for, and that they had no reason to remove. They had removed one of the weapon archetypes from Destiny 1. They had taken all of our weapons away. Those weapons you spent the last 3 years grinding for, gone. They were taken away, and now they're slowly being returned to us in the form of paid DLC. The story also showed that Bungie's team had no respect for the lore that they had spent so long intricately crafting. When our Guardian's light is ripped away at the beginning of the game, we have to find a shard of the Traveler to draw light from. Have they forgotten that their grimoire clearly stated that the Night Stalkers, Stormcallers, and Sunbreakers do not draw their light from the Traveler? Why then can we not simply play those classes from the outset of the game? Well, it was easier for Bungie to simply say that all Guardians lost their light, rather than try to write in that many Guardians could still access their powers, but the overwhelming force of Ghaul's military had still pushed the Guardians out of the city. This is just one of the many examples of Bungie's lazy writing. How could this have happened? Did Bungie learn nothing over the past 3 years? Well, it turns out they had learned something. Cue the release of the Curse of Osiris. This expansion was complete and utter garbage. It was by far the worst DLC I had ever played in literally any game ever. And I played the Omega DLC in Mass Effect 3. So I know a thing or two about bad DLC. This DLC once again showed that Bungie had no respect for the lore or the characters they had created. They built this DLC with minimal content in a tiny patrol area and then went on to try and pass off story missions as strikes. Everything in this expansion screamed laziness. Next came the Mars DLC, which was a definite improvement on its predecessor, but it still didn't get things right. There were spots in the story that didn't line up quite right with the lore, and it was overall a pretty boring experience, bar the end game, which actually did liven things up a bit. Now, what am I saying that these two DLCs show us? They show us that Bungie did this on purpose. When you compare the life cycle of Destiny 1 and Destiny 2, you'll notice the pattern. There's the launch, which doesn't have nearly as much content as we've been promised. Then, an absolutely abhorrent first DLC, Dark Below and then Curse of Osiris respectively. Then, a slightly better one to try to smooth things over, House of Wolves and Warmind respectively. And then what? You get what's known in the Destiny community as a Comet DLC. These are the large expansions to the game that add major changes and shake things up. In Destiny 1, we got the Taken King. In Destiny 2, we got Forsaken. These two DLCs are actually pretty similar when you really break them down. They both added new supers to the game. They both had longer campaigns than either of their predecessor expansions, and they both adjusted the weapon system to some degree. They also both brought in features that really should have been in the game since day one. It just gives the impression that Bungie doesn't care what the consumer wants. At one time, Bungie was a company that cared, a company that created great games because it's what they loved doing. But somewhere between the end of their relationship with Microsoft and the beginning of their relationship with Activision, Bungie became a greedy company that puts the dollar before the gamer. The concept art from Destiny 1 clearly shows that they have been planning content that's in Destiny 2 since before the first game even came out. Now, granted, concept art doesn't necessarily mean that this particular piece of art will make it into the final product. That's not the damning evidence. If you go back and watch the reveal video for Destiny, Pathway Out of Darkness, you can see one of the developers' computer screens, and right there is the social area on Mercury in Destiny 2 from the Osiris DLC, the Lighthouse. And shortly after that, you can see the skybox for the explorable area, the EDZ, and you can see parts of the EDZ shortly after that. It's very clear that several of the locations from Destiny 2 were already completed before the launch of Destiny 1. This just makes it so obvious that Bungie has all of this content waiting on the back burner, and they're just slicing it up into small pieces to sell to us at a premium price instead of giving us a full, complete product so that they can make more money. Alright, I may have let that get away from me a little bit. I think I've said enough about Bungie's shady business practices. There are a few things that they could do to start making up for these transgressions, but I'll get to that after I do a proper review of this series. You know how I feel about the Destiny 1 story, at least at launch, but I haven't dived into the lore yet. Bungie have crafted a deep and truly interesting lore. It's this lore that's gotten me to stick around as long as I have and continue playing Destiny to this day. The way the grimoire is intertwined with the story, light as it is truly astonishing. The only problem with the lore? Up until the launch of Destiny 2, you had to go to a companion app to read it. Since most people either didn't know or couldn't be bothered, the lore went relatively unnoticed by the vast majority of the Destiny community. The easiest way to consume this content was to follow a lore master on YouTube, like Sir Wallen, My Name is Bife, or Myelin Games. In Destiny 2, you got the lore tabs, but those were restricted to specific pieces of equipment. It was a start, but it wasn't until just last week that Destiny finally got something that even resembles a codex. The Triumph book allows you to read most of the game's lore from within the game. It's still lacking, but it's something. Destiny and Destiny 2 feature some of the most finely crafted gunplay I've ever seen in a video game. Between the sound work, the design of the weapons, the visuals as you fire, and the actual feel of firing the weapons in Destiny, you truly feel like you're wielding weapons of immense power. There's nothing quite like Destiny gunplay. At least, nothing that I've ever played has quite stacked up. Borderlands is the closest comparison I can think of off the top of my head, and the gunplay in that game makes me feel like I'm playing with deadly Fisher-Price toys. Destiny also features some incredible visual design. Some of the skyboxes are absolutely stunning. When you land on Nessus for the first time, you look around and feel like you're truly visiting a completely alien world. Destiny and Destiny 2 feature some of the most intricate and beautiful locations I've ever visited in a video game. The score in Destiny is spot on too. As always, Bungie have managed to put together a moving and unforgettable score to complement the worlds that they've built. The music perfectly fits the mood of every mission, cutscene, patrol area, raid, and lost sector. Everything you do is complemented by the score. Some parts of the story are even overshadowed by the score. While the story may dip pretty much constantly, the score never disappoints. If you're just here to ask about whether or not Forsaken is worth the $40, I'd be inclined to say yes. We still haven't gotten the raid, and I do have my gripes, obviously. But if you've enjoyed the Destiny grind up to now, there's no reason you won't enjoy Forsaken. If you've never played Destiny before, then I'd simply tell you not to bother with Destiny 2 yet. Go and pick up the Destiny 1 collection for $20 and play through that title with all 4 of its DLCs, and you'll feel like you're playing a complete game instead of a game that's missing core features. Destiny 2 is still seriously lacking, and I get the feeling that we won't get the full game until next September. My next ratings will be a combined score for the series so far. As this is all going to be one continuous story from now until the end of Destiny 3, I'll update the score as I go along. Fortunately for you, next year's Destiny video won't feature my preamble about Bungie and its practices. For the time budget, Destiny and Destiny 2 will get different scores, as Destiny has stopped receiving updates and can be played differently than Destiny 2. Destiny 2 gets a mere 5 on the scale. As you're required to constantly fight with the game's soft cap to level up, if you're a full-time worker, you'll be left behind by the hardcore audience almost immediately. Destiny is scored at an 8. Since all of the content is already out, you can pick up the game and play it at your own pace. You won't have to rush to try and grind up to level to keep up with other players or the content. In the story department, I'm giving Destiny a 5, and most of those points come from the Grimoire. Somebody on the team that writes the lore did something right, and it's this lore that gave me any reason at all to stick around and play Destiny for the last 5 years. For the gameplay, Destiny gets a solid 10. It's a Bungie game. What do you expect? Visual and audio? 7. Destiny is a visually and audibly stunning game, and there are times where it will absolutely take your breath away. That doesn't mean that everything Bungie has been done right, though. In Osiris, they got lazy, and I'm pretty sure they reused some of the Mars assets to make Mercury happen. I can't prove this, but it did look visually very similar to Mars. Then comes Warmind, which 100% reused Mars assets from D1, as it's actually set on Mars. This leaves us with the following final scores. If Bungie wants to begin to make up for its reprehensible and anti-consumer behavior, it needs to give us a show of good faith. I think that the best way to do that, and also to bring back the old Destiny 1 player base, is to remaster the raids from Destiny 1 for Destiny 2 and to release them free of charge. When Bungie released the microtransaction store, they had said that it would be microtransactions that would pay for the future DLCs. As they failed to follow through with this promise, I don't think that it's much of a stretch for the microtransactions to be put to good use, paying for the remastering of the original raids. Anyway, this script has just hit 6 pages, and I get the feeling that this is going to turn into a long one. So if you like what you saw, then be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and if you feel I've missed anything, be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll see y'all next week. Peace.